take a guess. How many words are exchanged between these two characters? The answer will shock you when you think about it. I ask this question because the answer reveals what I believe is the beauty behind this episode. It isn't that this story is super unique, because I know I've seen tragic mother stories similar to this in Dandadan's contemporaries. Although the subject matter handled here is more mature in nature, this is not particularly a long or complex story. And while the writing is spot on for each one of these characters involved here, I wouldn't say that's the aspect that left me speechless. I would argue that the visual storytelling is what made this tearjerker so powerful. It's how this story is told, which is what makes it so impactful. The first thing that stood out to me about this episode is its tone. There's a radical departure from what we usually expect from Dandadan. This is established from the very first shot. The first 4 seconds are pitch black. All we can hear is Silky panting frantically, gasping for air. There's no OST in the background. It's just us and this distressed voice. When we do get a visual, it's this dimly lit POV shot. We can barely make out where she is, and we have no idea who she is running from. What is apparent is that it all seems incredibly desperate as the camera swoops around frantically in search of something. She falls and we go smack bang into darkness again. The fallen Silky reaches out and we transition to the present day, Silky failing to grab Ira, hinting that whatever she was searching for is somehow connected to Ira. And that's just the first 27 seconds of this episode. This opening scene is incredibly important. Previously, I said that I felt that a sad backstory wouldn't fit the tone of the series so far.
Previously on J-Man Animates.
I'm curious to see if they will go down the Demon Slayer route. However, with Dandadan's light-hearted tone so far, I feel as though it isn't necessary. But my god, was I wrong. This sequence set my expectations. I didn't laugh at any point in the episode. It's clear from the start that this isn't about Okarun's ball anymore. We do see Okarun get back his ball, but that moment is so brief. We aren't even given time to digest this small victory as an audience, because we find out that Ira is dead before cutting to the opening. So while this episode isn't about Okarun's ball, it is about Silky and Ira, two characters that have experienced loss. Among other changes, this specific sequence wasn't in the manga. I believe episode director Kotaro Matsunaga and Shuto Enomoto made the right choice including this, because it immediately made me take things more seriously. I am put into Silky's shoes for a moment. It's the starting point of making me feel empathetic for a character that I made jokes about previously. This transition triggers a question in my brain about her character motivation. What is driving her to want Ira so much? What's happened between this shot and the present day? I think that this flashback is so beautifully constructed because it's a masterclass in characterization, and it's all done subtly in the anime. In the present day, we get small hints about who Silky really is. 1, she seeks affection for Ira, specifically referring to her as mummy. 2, she is possessive, constantly using the expression my Ira. 3, she makes this brief retort, "Don't you dare touch my beautiful legs." 4, she's doing all of this all while wearing an oversized ballerina costume. In this flashback, all 4 of these elements are expanded on. We find out why each one of these elements are present without the use of barely any dialogue. The anime makes use of various techniques to relay information to the audience, subtly, while the manga is a lot more explicit. I don't think that either approach should be seen as inherently more inferior, but in this case, I prefer the anime style of storytelling. There's an aspect of her backstory that you might easily miss out on in the anime if you aren't paying attention. It didn't register to me immediately, but it's clear that Silky was some sort of sex worker. In the manga, this is apparent from the first page of the flashback, while in the anime, it isn't explicitly shown or stated in any form of dialogue that this is the case. You have to pay attention to all of the visual cues you are given, and while it isn't apparent at first, the more the montage unravels, the more everything makes sense. One of the techniques they make use of is something I like to describe as the rule of three. There's probably a technical term for this, coined by some critical writer guy, but I just made this up for this video. There are multiple different stories in this montage, and I noticed a good amount of them come in threes. The sex work shots, the money counting shots, and even this winding panning shot. These shots give you a sort of mini story with a clear beginning, middle, and end. You could take these three isolated shots from the sex work scene and tell a story. She feels dead inside, but it pays money. However, does getting this money need to be so painful? This is why the slow folks in the audience like me probably didn't clock on that she was a sex worker until the third shot in this mini story. For the clever guys out there, you probably realize this from all of the information present from the introduction of the flashback before she gets home. The flashback opens in contrast to the opening of the episode as we fade to white instead of black. We hear a seemingly less distressing sound this time. It's a timer. I say seemingly because the further we get into the story, the more unsettling this timer becomes. There's this aerial view of Silky laid down on a bed in a dimly lit room. She's nude with her bra still laid out on the bed. If we zoom in, we see the rest of her clothes are still on the floor. If that wasn't enough, there are tissues and a telephone system on the counter behind her, hinting that this must be some sort of business establishment. The second shot in this sequence is money, then we see Silky in bed. I am spooked out after examining this shot in further detail. It's like her only source of light or hope is outside of this room she must be in. She gets up just to turn off the timer. This is different from the manga, which makes this scene a lot clearer. We see Silky in bed, naked, while one of her customers is putting on his trousers. The manga repeats this later in the following panels as we see Silky put on her clothes while one of her customers leaves. The anime relies on an increased shot selection and character animation to convey this information, as we don't see any of her customers throughout this entire flashback. We are greeted by another aerial shot of Silky walking on the way home when we get a glance of a familiar ballerina dress. Silky once again steps into a dimly lit space. This time we are observing her from afar. She hesitates as she unlocks the door. From afar, we could have assumed that her head was bowed down as she was getting ready to unlock the door. But with this close-up, we can see that there's more to it than that. She isn't happy. The door opens and we get this bright light. It's the hope in her life. Silky sees her child and finally smiles. She leans down to greet her child with a simple, "I'm home." We find out that she has a couple of different jobs, and again, we aren't told this. Instead, it's shown. I have to take time to shout out the musical composer Kensuke Ushio for this soft piano track that carries us through this montage. A montage that is split between Silky's home life and the harsh reality of being a single mother. Light is used throughout to show the contrast in moods. At home, the sun is beaming out of this window as she is teaching her child ballet poses. Now we are beginning to understand why ballet is so important to her. We juxtapose to this shot of this dimly lit room of a single mother collecting money from her sex work. Another technique that is used to convey additional information is intricate character animation. She doesn't simply pick up the money, she smashes her hand on the table and scrunches it up in this aggressive motion, showing us the frustration she must feel as a sex worker. We bounce back to her home life where things are bright and blissful. She's tired from having to work multiple jobs, but at least she has her child. Earlier, I said that the timer is unsettling to me. The reason is that it shows how fractured Silky's life is between these jobs and her child. As I mentioned earlier, I think that what makes this montage so powerful is that it has multiple stories, each with a clear beginning, middle, and end. Like this shot of Silky's child receiving her ballerina costume that swivels around the screen like a pirouette. She gets the dress, tries it for the first time, and then Silky rewards her. This swivel shot carries on all the way until reaching her birthday cake. Salute to the animator on this shot. So often in the anime community, we attribute Sakuga to flashy fight scenes, but delicate movements like this deserve to be appreciated too. It's so difficult to animate characters moving in a 3D space like this, not to mention that the cake is also being animated as well. Brilliant draftsmanship. Silky's child only speaks, and I use that word very lightly, at the start of the story with this little squeal, and right at the end of the story when she cries after witnessing her mother being brutally beaten up. And this is one of the most devastating scenes I've seen in anime. These men are merciless. They grab her by the ponytail and smash her into a door. Again, it doesn't explicitly state who these guys are in the anime. They just beat up Silky, take her daughter, and leave. However, in the manga, things are a little different. Everything is more explicit. From this string of panels, we can see they are taking money from Silky, so they must be some form of debt collectors. Whereas in the anime, if you blink, you might miss this guy peeking into this envelope that's very similar to one of the envelopes that Silky had throughout this sequence. Silky frantically runs after them, and we are back to the scene from the beginning of the episode, only this time we know who she is reaching out to. This is another place where the anime and manga differ. In the manga, Silky runs and falls. Devastated, remembering the memory of her daughter, she can't bear to do it anymore, so she finds the highest building to delete herself. Whereas in the anime, I didn't initially understand what happened because it's so subtle. Initially, when I saw Ira pull on this bloodied Silky, I was confused, thinking, is she still alive? We don't see a shot of a building like in the manga, but we do see a view of the city as Silky is dancing on a rooftop. And golly, the animation is as beautiful as Glenn Keane's short film, Duet. After Silky does this eloquent ballet routine, she leaps. The scene fades to black and we hear a crash. which is an adaptation of the tragic moment in the manga. Now, I don't know if these changes were made due to outside pressure, but regardless, I prefer the way the anime handled this scene. This subtlety made it so I was piecing together the story as it was happening instead of it being explicitly shown to me. This drew me deeper into Silky's story. I've rewatched this montage a few times to see all of the little bits of information they give us about her relationship with her daughter. For example, Silky gave her daughter her old ballet shoes to wear as she hadn't bought her costume yet. It's heartbreaking. Each time we flash back to the money and we see Silky carefully counting up each yen, she's finally able to afford the costume for her daughter. However, in the end, she's brutally beaten up because she couldn't afford to pay off her debt. All of this visual storytelling made me connect to her character more. Remember the question I asked at the start of the video? The answer is 2. A simple "I'm home" are the only comprehensible words exchanged between these two characters. Crying and squealing doesn't count. These thugs that come in at the end say 12 words. That's 6 times more dialogue than the mother and child. What's even more incredible is that in the manga, 3 words are exchanged between Silky and her daughter. A picture truly is worth 1,000 words. Episodes like this are a reminder of why taking care when adapting a show is important, and it makes me cry as a Blue Lock fan because I know in season 2 we aren't going to touch anything as great as this episode. Although there's one aspect of her characterization that I'm not crystal clear on. The long, unkept, wiry hair. My guess is that it signifies her protective and possessive qualities because in the anime it slowly grows as her desire to keep Ira from harm intensifies. Editing J-Man hair, I guess her long stringy hair highlights her possessive nature because we always see her wrap people around in it. She draws those people towards her. Another reason why I love this flashback is that not only does it reveal information about Silky, it reveals information about Ira too. When we are introduced to Ira, she is this self-absorbed it girl that feeds off of everybody's attention. It seems like she doesn't do these kind gestures because she's a good person, but because it makes her feel better about herself. In this flashback, we find out that Ira's mother is dead. Her father tells her to be stronger. He tells her to be a girl her mother would be proud of. Maybe that's the reason why she always wants to appear as though she's perfect. Even if she is a bitch when she's doing it, this sequence triggers what might be the start of great character growth for Ira. We see her acting selflessly for the first time. Ira embraces Silky Acrobat and reassures her, saying that she loves her and this makes her the happiest person in the world. I found it incredibly sad when Turbo Granny states that Silky would cease to exist without anybody remembering her. After all of the shit this woman has been through, at least Ira and Momo will remember her. Ira embracing her for the first time almost made me cry, and it gets me a little emotional every time I think about this scene. The more I think about this episode, the sadder it makes me, as I myself grew up with a single mother. It highlights the sacrifices and grit it takes to raise a child and be a breadwinner at the same time. Dandadan isn't perfect. One of my mates recently pointed out to me that he feels as though the main characters are sexualized way too much. And he has a point. The series has its fair share of batshit crazy elements that could easily scare someone off from continuing the story. Despite this, it handled such a mature subject matter like sex work incredibly well. Beautifully crafted episodes like this are the reason why I believe Dandadan is the best anime this season. And who knows, it could end up being anime of the year. And I know for many people, this episode will definitely be a contender for episode of the year.